Welcome to Plato's Cave for our December 20th, 2014 broadcast. My name is Doris Motormouth and I am your Poseidon news anchor. Bird flu found in backyard Oregon poultry flock, USDA says Bloomberg. The disease known as bird flu has been found in a backyard poultry flock in Oregon, the U.S. Department of Agriculture said, adding that there's no immediate public health concern. Highly pathogenic avian influenza was detected in the flock of about 100 birds, comprised of guinea fowl and chickens, in Winston, Oregon, a unit of the USDA said today in a statement on its website. Birds from the affected backyard flock will not enter the food chain, the USDA said. All poultry products and wild birds are safe to eat as long as they are properly handled and cooked. The virus strain is H5N8 and has not been found in commercial poultry anywhere in the U.S. The USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service said. The agency also reported cases this week of virus strains of avian influenza in wild birds in Washington state. A commercial flock operated responsibly would have very little risk of contagion, said Tom Elam, the president of Farm Econ LLC in Carmel, Indiana, who has studied the poultry market for more than 30 years. It's not something you want to panic about, but you have to realize that even in the best situation, things can happen. It's disturbing, but at this point, it's not a disaster. Canada outbreak. A bird flu outbreak in Canada's westernmost province of British Columbia left poultry processors scrambling to find enough turkey for Christmas tables. About 155,000 birds in the Fraser Valley died of flu or were set to be euthanized with carbon dioxide gas and then composted after avian influenza was detected at 8 sites. Washington state borders British Columbia. The bird flu is on the west coast of the U.S., and it's being moved by these migratory birds that are being moved from north to south, Will Sawyer, vice president of U.S. Animal Protein Research for Rabobank International in Atlanta, said in a telephone interview. That should give us confidence that if it does continue to move, it'll move in that direction and not towards the southeastern U.S., where the American commercial poultry industry is centered, he said. The virus strain in Oregon is the same that was found in captive gerfalcons in Whatcom County, Washington, the agency said. A separate strain, H5N2, was found in northern pintail ducks in Washington, the USDA said December 16. The finding in Oregon was quickly reported and identified due to increased awareness of avian influenza in light of the findings in Washington, the USDA said. Strains of the disease have also been found in birds in Europe, India, Egypt and Mexico, according to Rabobank. The US, Taiwan and South Africa are among countries that have imposed temporary restrictions on poultry from British Columbia, the third largest turkey-producing province in Canada. Dollar resumes climb as Yellen signals 2015 interest rate rise. Bloomberg. A gauge of the dollar rose for the 8th time in 9 weeks after Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen signaled that the central bank is poised to increase interest rates next year starting as early as April. The greenback headed for gains this year against all except one of its 31 major peers, a feat it hasn't accomplished since 1997. As Yellen said, the impact of Russian turmoil on the U.S. economy is small. Hungary's forint and the Polish zloty sank on concern the economic crisis that has driven the ruble down 44% this year will spread. The Swiss franc weakened the most in 2 months versus the euro after the central bank introduced negative interest rates. Yellen is really trying to say there's a lot of volatility out there, but it's not having a dramatic impact on the outlook of U.S. Kevin Hebner, a foreign exchange strategist at J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, said by phone yesterday in New York. The process of the market adjusting to the Fed's rate rise projections is going to get the dollar appreciating, especially against the euro and yen. Bloomberg's gauge of the dollar rose 0.9% this week in New York to 1,125.58, the highest close since March 2009. That followed a 0.6% fall last week that snapped a 7-week rally. It has gained 10% this year. The greenback rose 0.6% to 119.50 yen, also an 8th gain in 9 weeks. It advanced 1.9% to $1.2229 per euro and reached $1.2220, the strongest since August 2012. The 18-nation currency fell 1.2% to 146.15 yen, a second week of declines. Weekly roundup. The forint slumped 4.2% versus the dollar, the biggest loser among the 31 major currencies, and the zloty fell 3.7%. The ruble extended its plummet as President Vladimir Putin said yesterday the crisis in Russia may last for 2 years. The weakening of the zloty was welcomed as a support for exporters. Central bank policymaker Elsbeta Chojna was quoted as saying by the PAP Newswire, "If the depreciation persists, it may be seen as a substitute for a rate cut," she said. Colombia's peso led gains, surging 4.8%, on a stabilization in the price of crude oil, the Andean nation's biggest exports. The pesos of Chile and Mexico were the next among advances, adding 1.2% and 1.1%. Telltale sign Switzerland's franc tumbled after the Swiss National Bank's decision to protect the currency's 1.20 per euro cap boosted speculation the European Central Bank will expand stimulus measures next year. Switzerland's move was a telltale sign that the SNB is cautious because of the ECB, said David Song, a New York-based currency analyst at FXCM Incorporated. The SNB is going to follow along with the ECB in terms of the easing cycle. The franc depreciated 0.2% to 1.20359 per euro, the biggest decline since the 5-day period ended October 3. The yen extended losses after the Bank of Japan said in a statement December 19 in Tokyo it will boost its monetary base at an annual pace of 80 trillion yen, a decision forecast by all 33 economists surveyed by Bloomberg News. The economy is expected to continue a moderate recovery as the effects of an April sales tax increase dissipate, the BOJ said. Unstoppable dollar. The dollar has gained against all of its 31 major counterparts this year except the Hong Kong dollar, a currency pegged to the greenback and which is up 0.01%. It last managed this feat in 1997, when another currency tied to the greenback at that time, China's yuan, managed a 0.23% gain. The U.S. currency recovered its losses this month after Fed officials on December 17 dropped a pledge to keep borrowing costs near zero for a considerable time. The shift in guidance means the committee considers it unlikely to begin the normalization process for at least the next couple of meetings. The Federal Open Market Committee's next scheduled decisions are January 28, March 18 and April 29. The FOMC statement made no reference to the Russian currency crisis or other global risks that have roiled financial markets. Yellen said afterward that officials discussed the issue at this week's policy meeting and agreed it would have little impact on the U.S. net longs. Things change quickly, and if they see a rapid rebound in the credit market and an acceleration on the payroll side, they want to have the option to raise rates significantly by mid-year, said Robert Tipp, chief investment strategist in Newark, New Jersey for Prudential Financial Incorporated's fixed income division, which oversees $533 billion in bonds. It's been a tremendous backdrop for the dollar. While still bullish, hedge funds and other large speculators reduced bets on dollar strength versus 8 of its major peers by the most in 9 months. The difference in the number of wagers on gains compared with those on declines, net longs, was 335,131 on December 16, according to data from the Washington-based Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Investors amassed a record $428,558 long contracts at the start of the month. North Korea denies hacking Sony, U.S. stands by its assertion. Reuters, North Korea said on Saturday U.S. accusations that it was involved in a cyberattack on Sony Pictures were groundless slander, and that it wanted a joint investigation into the incident with the United States. An unnamed spokesman of North Korea's foreign ministry said there would be serious consequences if Washington refused to agree to the probe and continued to accuse Pyongyang. According to the North Korean UN mission and its official KCNA news agency, the United States stands by its assertion that North Korea was to blame, a White House National Security Council, NSC, spokesman said on Saturday, in response to the remarks. On Friday, U.S. President Barack Obama blamed North Korea for the devastating cyberattack, which had led to the Hollywood studio canceling the imminent release of The Interview, a comedy on the fictional assassination of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. In its first substantive response, the isolated North Korea said it could prove it had nothing to do with the hacking attack. We propose to conduct a joint investigation with the U.S. in response to groundless slander being perpetrated by the U.S. by mobilizing public opinion, the North Korean spokesman was cited as saying by KCNA. If the U.S. refuses to accept our proposal for a joint investigation and continues to talk about some kind of response by dragging us into the case, it must remember there will be grave consequences, the spokesman said. The North Korean spokesman was quoted as making similar remarks in a statement issued later by North Korea's UN mission. NSC spokesman Mark Stroh dismissed this, saying, "We are confident the North Korean government is responsible for this destructive attack. We stand by this conclusion. The government of North Korea has a long history of denying responsibility for destructive and provocative actions," he added. The U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation said on Friday it had determined that North Korea was behind the hacking of Sony, saying Pyongyang's actions fell outside the bounds of acceptable state behavior. Obama said North Korea appeared to have acted alone. Washington began consultations with Japan, China, South Korea and Russia seeking their assistance in reining in North Korea. Japan and South Korea said they would cooperate. China, North Korea's only major ally, has yet to respond, but a Beijing-run newspaper said the interview was not a movie for Hollywood or U.S. society to be proud of. An Obama administration official said on Saturday, "In our cybersecurity discussions, both China and the United States have expressed the view that conducting destructive attacks in cyberspace is outside the norms of appropriate cyber behavior." It was the first time the United States had directly accused another country of a cyberattack of such magnitude on American soil and set up a possible new confrontation between longtime foes Washington and Pyongyang. Obama said he wished that Sony had spoken to him first before yanking the movie, suggesting it could set a bad precedent. "I think they made a mistake," he said. Not caved in. Sony Pictures Entertainment chief executive Michael Linton insisted the company did not capitulate to hackers and said it was still looking for alternative platforms to release the interview this week. A spokeswoman for Sony had said the company did not have further release plans for the $44 million film starring Seth Rogen and James Franco. Despite Obama's stern warning to North Korea, his options for responding to the attack by the impoverished state appeared limited. The president declined to be specific about any actions under consideration. North Korea has been subject to U.S. sanctions for more than 50 years, but they have had little effect on its human rights policies or its development of nuclear weapons. It has become expert in hiding its often criminal money-raising activities, largely avoiding traditional banks. In a separate statement on Saturday in response to criticism of its rights record, North Korea vowed to boost its nuclear power to counter Washington's hostile policy, saying it had become apparent the United States aimed to invade the North under the guise of human rights abuses. The FBI said technical analysis of malicious software used in the Sony attack found links to malware that North Korean actors had developed and found a significant overlap with other malicious cyber activity previously tied to Pyongyang, but it otherwise gave scant details on how it concluded that North Korea was behind the attack. U.S. experts say Obama's options could include cyber retaliation, financial sanctions, criminal indictments against individuals implicated in the attack or even a boost in U.S. military support to South Korea, still technically at war with the North. But the effect of any response would be limited given North Korea's isolation and the fact that it is already heavily sanctioned for its nuclear program. There is also the risk that an overly harsh U.S. response could provoke Pyongyang to escalate any cyber warfare. Non-conventional capabilities such as cyber warfare and nuclear technology are the weapons of choice for the impoverished North, defectors said in Seoul. Obama says opening to Cuba will take years to bear fruit. Bloomberg. President Barack Obama said the full opening of relations between Cuba and the U.S. may take years, even as he offered assurances the new U.S. stance will bring change to the island nation's closed society. Despite vehement criticism from Republican lawmakers and some Democrats, the president said he was confident his reversal of the half-century-long U.S. effort to isolate its Caribbean neighbor 90 miles off the coast of Florida was the right course. Increasing U.S. travel and trade chips away at this hermetically sealed society, and I believe offers the best prospect then, of leading to greater freedom, greater self-determination on the part of the Cuban people, Obama said at a White House news conference Friday before leaving for vacation in Hawaii. Obama spoke 2 days after he announced the U.S. would move to restore diplomatic relations with Cuba for the first time in more than a half-century, removing one of the last remnants of the Cold War. While it represents a major shift in U.S. policy, he said it would be unrealistic for me to map out the pace of change in Cuba that he expected would move in fits and starts. Obama also tamped down speculation he would fly to Havana to meet with the country's president, Raúl Castro, saying that a trip to Cuba might only come after he's left office. "We're not at a stage here where me visiting Cuba or President Castro coming to the United States is in the cards," Obama said. "I don't know how this relationship will develop over the next several years." Castro's speech. Castro, in a speech to Cuban parliament today, urged the U.S. to end its embargo, while welcoming the agreement to restore ties. "An important step was taken, but the essential problem of the economic embargo still needs to be solved," he said, adding that its complete lifting would be a long and difficult struggle. The Cuban leader, whose older brother Fidel Castro ruled the country until 2008, also said that Cuba will never give up the ideals it has fought for and asked the U.S. to respect its political system. A full lifting of the U.S. embargo on trade and travel would require action by Congress, where Cuban-American lawmakers have denounced Obama's action as a capitulation to the Castro regime. Some Republicans, led by Florida Senator Marco Rubio, a potential contender for his party's 2016 presidential nomination, say they will work to block Obama from normalizing relations with Cuba. "Policy change I will certainly weigh in on behalf of legislation lifting the embargo," Obama said. "But I don't anticipate that happens right away." Obama's policy change was the culmination of more than a year of secret negotiations that involved an intercession by Pope Francis, the facilitation of the Canadian government, and an extraordinary telephone conversation between the U.S. leader and the Cuban president. He punctuated his remarks Friday with a light-hearted joke about former Cuban leader Fidel Castro, long a pariah in American politics. He said that in speaking to Raúl Castro, his brother Fidel came up only once. After making introductory remarks lasting 15 minutes, Obama said, he apologized to the Cuban president for the length of his remarks. "Don't worry about it, Mr. President. You are still a young man, and you have still the chance to break Fidel's record. He once spoke 7 hours straight," Obama said Raúl Castro told him. And then President Castro proceeded to deliver his own preliminary remarks that lasted at least twice as long as mine. Then, he added, "I was able to say, obviously, it runs in the family shifting alliances. The embargo of Cuba, first imposed in 1960 after the Cuban Revolution and tightened in later years, has persisted in part because of the influence of the Cuban-American exile community in Florida. Generational shifts have reduced support for the embargo, though Obama's moves drew criticism from some Cuban-American lawmakers. Cuba also is confronting geopolitical shifts as its longtime patrons, Russia and Venezuela, are being squeezed by plummeting oil prices. Within the deal, the two governments wrapped the release of American aid worker Alan Gross and the exchange of a U.S. spy being held in a Cuban jail for 3 Cuban intelligence agents. Cuba also agreed to release 53 people the U.S. considers political prisoners, U.S. officials said. While Obama's changes won't open Cuba to U.S. tourism, they will make it easier for U.S. businesses to export to Cuba's construction, telecommunications and agricultural sectors. Commerce Secretary Penny Pritzker is planning a trade mission to the island.